Okay, so now that you are hopefully pretty comfortable with the chain rule, we are now going to use the chain rule in combination with product rule and quotient rule and do some factoring to get answers that are simplified. So behind me is a worked out problem. I just want you to see that because there's quite a few steps involved. So in the assignment that I'm going to give you for over the weekend, I'm going to assign it tomorrow. I just want to give you a heads up that you probably want to start early, take your time. I'm only giving you the odds so you can check your answers in the back of the book. And as always, email me if you have issues, and we can always, I will definitely schedule a tutorial for these. So this problem is worked out. I'm going to erase how I worked it out and restart it from the beginning so you can see how it's done. So here we go. So the function that we're starting with is x squared times the square root of 1 minus x squared. So the first thing that we're going to do is rewrite this function so that we have exponents instead of the radical. So I'm going to rewrite as x squared times 1 minus x squared to the 1/2 power. So that's my first step. Now that's not the derivative. I'm standing because I need to move around a lot. That's not the derivative. All I've done is rewrite it, and now we're going to find the derivative. And the first thing that we're going to think about to find the derivative of this thing is the product rule. And I actually really like that we're doing these right now because we're going to have a test coming up over power rule, product rule, quotient rule, and chain rule. And we essentially are going to be using all of those in these problems coming up. So it's a nice review for what's happening. So we're going to use the product rule because what I see is I'm multiplying two things together. I'm multiplying x squared times 1 minus x squared to the 1/2 power. But you also might be noticing I'm going to have to use the chain rule to find the derivative of this. So product rule tells me that to find the derivative of a product, I first take the first term, leave it as it is, and multiply it by the derivative of the second term. Now the derivative of the second term, I'm going to have to use chain rule to find. So I'm going to do 1/2 times 1 minus x squared. Oops, the square goes inside. And then I subtract 1 from the 1/2 to get the negative 1/2 power. And then chain rule tells me also I need to find the derivative of the inner function, and the derivative of the inner function is negative 2x. So that's the first half of my product rule, which included chain rule. Now the second half, I'm finding the derivative of the first factor, which is x squared, so that's just 2x using the power rule, and I'm leaving the second part of the function the same, 1 minus x squared to the 1/2 power. So I've now also included the chain rule. And I'll just be making note of what's happening as I go. Please feel free to pause if it's going too fast so you can stop and take notes. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, I've applied all of my derivative rules, the product rule and the chain rule. So with the rest of my problem, I'm going to be simplifying, pulling together like terms, and factoring. So here we go. Now here, I am going to pull together my x squared, my 1/2, and my negative 2x. I'm going to multiply all those together, and that is going to give me negative x to the third, because I'm multiplying x squared times x, the 1/2 and the negative 2 are going to give me negative 1. So that's all of that. And then I'm still left with 1 minus x squared to the negative 1/2. So that's the first part. And then plus, over here on this part, there's really nothing for me to simplify. I'm just going to bring it right down. 2x times times 1 minus x squared to the 1/2. So I'm going to call this step simplify. And like terms. Okay. Now I want to factor. So let me get down here a little bit. So now I'm going to factor out common factors, and we're going to look carefully at what those common factors will be. So I see that I've got an x cubed, a negative x cubed here, and a 2x there. Greatest common factor between those two is x. And then I also see I have a 1 minus x squared to the negative 1/2 and a 1 minus x squared to the 1/2. Now that's also a common factor. And the factor that we're going to pull out is the factor with the smallest power, or the smallest exponent. So if we have an exponent of negative 1/2 and an exponent of positive 1/2, the negative exponent is going to be the smaller exponent. So the other greatest common factor that I'm pulling out of this is 1 minus x squared to the negative 1/2. That is my GCF, okay? Now, I'm pulling out first from this half. Let me get another color. So right now I'm pulling out of here, or factoring out of here. And so I'm pulling out an x from the negative x cubed. That's going to leave me negative x squared. And 1 minus x squared to the negative 1/2, I'm just dividing that out of itself, so that is just now gone. Okay, so now pulling out of the second, or it's just 1, I should say, it's not gone, it's just 1. Now I'm pulling out of this, so I pull out an x from 2x, that's going to leave me plus 2. And now here's where things get pretty interesting. I'm pulling a 1 minus x squared to the negative 1/2 from a 1 minus x squared to the positive 1/2. I'm saying things like pulling out and factoring. All of those are ways to say dividing by. And when you divide powers, you subtract them. So I'm doing negative 1/2, or 1/2 minus a negative 1/2. I'm dividing the 1/2 by the negative 1/2. 1/2 minus a negative 1/2 is 1/2 plus 1/2. That gives me 1. So that means this is now to a factor of 1. So that was my factoring step. Okay, so it looks like I've got some stuff I can clean up inside this set of brackets right here. So I'm going to leave the factors as they are. X 1 minus x squared to the negative 1/2. And inside my brackets, which I'm now going to write as parentheses, I'm going to distribute and see what I can combine. So I'm going to have negative x squared. I'm going to distribute this 2 plus 2 minus 2x squared. So I'm going to call that, again, simplify. Okay, so here's where we are. I see now, and again, I'm leaving my factors as they are, but I can simplify more. Negative x squared minus 2x squared is going to give me negative 3x squared, and I have a positive 2, so I'm going to do 2 minus 3x squared. So this is the 2, and the negative x squared minus 2x squared gave me negative 3x squared. Okay, we're almost done, I promise. So again, that was another simplify step. Now, we're ready to write our derivative in its final form, and I just have to figure out, do I have things that go on top, do I have things that go on bottom? And in fact, I do have something that goes on the bottom. It's this right here because it has a negative power to the negative 1/2, so I'm going to draw my fraction bar. 1 minus x squared to the negative 1/2 is this, and on the top goes x 2 minus 3x squared. And there's barely room for that there. That is my final answer. That's 1.